Christmas was supposed to bring families closer. Instead, it destroyed mine. 3 days before Christmas, my son called me in tears. "Dad, my credit card isn't working. Can I borrow yours? I'll pay you back after my bonus." I trusted him. 48 hours later, my phone buzzed with purchase after purchase. $2,800, $1,900, $3,600. Luxury watches, designer handbags, diamond jewelry. I smiled, thinking, he must have finally bought me something special after all these years. Christmas morning arrived. My son and his wife handed expensive gifts to her parents. Everyone cheered. Then my daughter-in-law looked at me, smiled awkwardly, and said, "Oh, we forgot to get you anything." My own son simply shrugged. "It's not a big deal, Dad." I quietly zipped my jacket, wished everyone Merry Christmas, and walked out. They thought I was just hurt. They had no idea. I had just made the biggest decision of my life. The very next morning, I called my attorney and removed my son and his wife from my $8.7 million family trust. 15 minutes later, my daughter-in-law called, asking for $15,000 to cover an emergency. By midnight, my phone showed 48 missed calls, but for the first time in years, I didn't answer a single one, because they had finally learned. Respect is worth far more than money. This is how my own son lost everything. On Christmas Day, the first notification appeared while I was pouring my morning coffee. $2,847.19, luxury department store. I frowned. Then another, $1,965.40, designer boutique. Another, $3,420, fine jewelry. By lunchtime, nearly $14,000 had disappeared from my credit card. I wasn't angry. Not yet. 3 days earlier, my only son, Ryan, had stood in my kitchen looking embarrassed. "Dad, my card hit its limit. Emma's family is expecting us for Christmas, and I still have shopping to finish. Can I borrow yours? I'll pay every penny back after my year-end bonus." I looked into the same blue eyes I'd watched grow from childhood. The little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The teenager I worked 2 jobs to put through college. The young man I helped buy his first home. How could I say no? I handed him my card. "Just don't go crazy." He laughed. "I won't, Dad." I believed him. That was my biggest mistake. I was 64 years old. After selling my construction company, I had more money than I ever dreamed of. But money had never mattered to me. Family did. Especially after my wife, Linda, passed away from cancer 6 years earlier. Before she died, she squeezed my hand and whispered something I never forgot. "Promise me, no matter what happens, keep this family together." I promised. For 6 years, I kept that promise. Even when Ryan stopped calling. Even when every holiday became about Emma's parents. Even when birthdays were forgotten. Even when Father's Day became just another ordinary Sunday. I told myself, they're busy. They're building their lives. Don't take it personally. I kept making excuses. Christmas morning finally arrived. I spent hours wrapping gifts. A vintage Rolex for Ryan. A diamond bracelet for Emma. A college fund check for my granddaughter, Lily. Even handmade photo albums filled with family memories. I loaded everything into my SUV. As I drove toward Ryan's house, snow covered the streets like a fresh white blanket. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Maybe this Christmas would be different. Maybe we'd finally feel like a family again. I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment I walked inside, I noticed something. Emma's parents were already there. Her father wore a brand new cashmere coat. Her mother carried a Louis Vuitton handbag that still had the tag tucked inside. The Christmas tree was overflowing with beautifully wrapped gifts. Ryan smiled. "Dad, you made it." He hugged me quickly before returning to help Emma. Not once did he ask if I needed help carrying my presents. I quietly placed my gifts under the tree. Dinner was wonderful. Everyone laughed. Everyone talked. Except, most of the conversation revolved around Emma's parents. Their vacations. Their retirement plans. Their anniversary cruise. I sat silently, smiling whenever someone looked my way. Invisible. Just like always. Then came the gift exchange. And that's when my heart broke. I sat quietly in the corner of the living room, watching everyone gather around the Christmas tree. The fireplace crackled. Christmas music played softly in the background. Laughter filled the room. To anyone looking in from outside, we looked like the perfect family. But perfect families don't make one person feel invisible. Emma clapped her hands together. "Okay, Time to open presents. Everyone cheered. Ryan reached beneath the tree and handed the first beautifully wrapped box to Emma's father. "Merry Christmas, Frank." Frank opened it carefully. Inside was a brand new Swiss watch. His eyes widened. "My God, Ryan, this must have cost a fortune." Ryan laughed. "You deserve it." Applause filled the room. Emma kissed her husband proudly. "See? I told you he'd love it." Then came another gift. A designer handbag for Emma's mother. She gasped so loudly that even little Lily covered her ears. "Oh, Ryan, this is exactly the one I wanted." She hugged him tightly. "I've never had a son-in-law this thoughtful." Those words hit me harder than they should have. I smiled anyway. Maybe they had something planned for me later. One by one, more expensive presents appeared. Luxury perfume, diamond earrings, a leather travel set, the newest tablet, gift after gift, each one accompanied by laughter, hugs, photographs, and heartfelt speeches. I noticed something strange. Every expensive purchase matched the notifications I'd received on my credit card. The watch, the handbag, the jewelry, everything. My stomach tightened. I looked at Ryan. He avoided my eyes. For the first time that day, I felt a knot forming in my chest. Finally, the pile beneath the tree became smaller. Ryan looked around. Emma looked around. Then both of them stood up. "Well," Ryan said, "I guess that's everything." I blinked. Everything. There was nothing with my name on it. Maybe they were joking. Maybe mine was hidden somewhere else. Emma suddenly laughed awkwardly. "Oh." She scratched the back of her neck. "We forgot to get you anything." The room became silent. Nobody spoke. Frank looked uncomfortable. Emma's mother stared at the floor. Little Lily looked back and forth between us, confused. Ryan shrugged his shoulders as if someone had forgotten to buy milk. "Sorry, Dad. We were just so busy." Next year. That was it. No apology. No embarrassment. No attempt to fix it. Just next year. I looked down at the wrapped gifts beside my chair. The Rolex. The diamond bracelet. The photo albums I'd spent weeks making. The college fund check for Lily. Suddenly, none of it mattered. I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I refused to let them see how badly they'd hurt me. "Merry Christmas, everyone." I handed Lily her presents. She hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Grandpa." That hug almost broke me. Ryan barely looked up from his phone. Emma was already admiring her mother's new handbag. No one noticed that I quietly picked up my coat. As I zipped my jacket, Frank finally spoke. "Leaving already? I have an early morning tomorrow." It was a lie, but I wasn't staying another minute. Ryan called from across the room, without even standing up. "Drive safe, Dad." Those were the last words he said to me that day. I closed the front door behind me. The cold December air hit my face. For several minutes, I simply stood beside my car while snowflakes landed on my coat. I wasn't crying. I was remembering. Every baseball game I'd coached. Every school tuition I'd paid. Every birthday party I'd organized after Linda died because Ryan was too young to understand loss. Every overtime shift. Every sacrifice. Every promise. And somehow, I'd become the least important person in my own son's life. The drive home felt endless. When I entered my empty house, silence greeted me. Linda's favorite Christmas ornament still hung on the tree. I picked it up carefully. A tiny glass angel. The one she'd bought during our first Christmas together. I sat in the living room for nearly an hour, staring at it. Then I whispered, "You were right, Linda." Years ago, she'd warned me. "Don't solve every problem with money, David. One day he'll stop appreciating your love because he'll expect your wallet." At the time, I'd defended Ryan. "He's a good kid." She smiled sadly. "I hope you're right." I wasn't. At exactly 8:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. For one brief second, I smiled. Maybe Ryan had realized what he'd done. Maybe he was calling to apologize. Instead, a text appeared. "Ryan, Dad, thanks again for letting us use your card. I'll figure out repayment sometime after tax season." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I can't believe we forgot your gift." Just, "Thanks for the card." I stared at the message. Then I slowly opened my banking app. The total charges were now over $18,000. Every single dollar had been spent on someone else. Not 1 cent. On the man who had paid for it all. That was the exact moment something inside me changed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the office of the attorney who had handled my family's estate for nearly 25 years. And before the hour was over, I made a decision that would change my son's life forever. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone to see if Ryan had called, because I already knew he hadn't. I made myself a cup of black coffee and sat in the same chair where Linda and I had spent countless mornings planning our future. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I picked up the framed photograph beside the fireplace. Ryan was 12 years old. His front teeth were missing. He was covered in mud after winning his first Little League championship. Linda had laughed so hard taking that picture that she'd nearly dropped the camera. Back then, we were a family. Now, I wasn't even important enough to deserve a Christmas card. I carefully placed the picture back on the shelf. Then I grabbed my coat. It was time. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the office of my attorney. Richard Collins had been my lawyer for nearly 25 years. He'd helped me build contracts for my construction show and company. He'd handled my business sale. And after Linda passed away, he prepared my estate plan. When his secretary saw me, she smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Parker. Mr. Collins is expecting you." Inside his office, Richard stood to shake my hand. "You sounded serious on the phone." "I am." He motioned toward the leather chair across from his desk. "So, what's happened?" For several seconds, I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, because saying it out loud would make it real. Finally, I looked him in the eye. "I want to change my will." Richard leaned back. "I wasn't expecting that. You've had the same estate plan for 6 years." "I know." He folded his hands. "Has something happened between you and Ryan?" I let out a slow breath. Christmas happened. For the next 30 minutes, I told him everything. The credit card, the expensive gifts, being forgotten, the text message, the silence. When I finished, Richard removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I've handled family disputes for decades. But this is heartbreaking." He opened my estate file. "Right now, Ryan is the primary beneficiary. He inherits your house, the investment portfolio, the vacation property, and the family trust." I nodded. "Not anymore." Richard looked at me carefully. "I have to ask, are you making this decision while angry?" "No. If I were angry, I'd wait. I'm making it because I've finally accepted the truth. My son doesn't love me. He loves what I can provide." The room fell silent. Richard slowly closed the folder. "I understand." For nearly 2 hours, we rewrote everything. The house would be sold after my death. Most of the money would go to children's hospitals and scholarship programs. Several charities Linda had supported would receive donations. Lily, my granddaughter, would still have a protected education fund that nobody, not even Ryan or Emma, could touch. The rest would be placed into a charitable foundation in Linda's name. Ryan's inheritance was reduced to $1. Richard paused before printing the final documents. "David, once you sign these papers, there's no going back." I picked up the pen. For a moment, my hand trembled. Not because I doubted myself, because every father imagines leaving something meaningful to his child, not disinheriting him. I signed my name anyway. One signature. 25 years of planning. Gone. Richard witnessed the documents. Then he quietly reached across the desk. "I'm sorry it came to this." "So am I." As I walked toward the parking lot, something strange happened. I didn't feel guilty. I felt peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to earn my son's love. I wasn't trying to buy another chance to be appreciated. I had finally stopped chasing someone who never looked back. At 11:17 a.m., my phone rang. Ryan. I watched it vibrate. For a second, I considered answering. Maybe he'd realized what he'd done. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Instead, the call went to voicemail. Seconds later, a new message arrived. "Dad, quick question. Do you remember the PIN for your credit card?" I stared at the screen. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry about yesterday." Not, "Did you get home safely?" He wanted the PIN. I smiled sadly. Then I blocked the card. Less than 2 minutes later, the fraud department from my bank called. "Mr. Parker? We've noticed several attempted transactions that were declined. Would you like to permanently deactivate this card?" "Yes." "And issue a new one. It'll be done immediately." That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. Snow covered Linda's headstone. I brushed it away with my glove and placed fresh white roses beside it. Then I sat on the small bench. "You tried to warn me. I just didn't want to believe our little boy could become someone who measured love by money." A cold wind moved through the trees. I smiled faintly. I kept my promise as long as I could. But I can't keep sacrificing my dignity just to keep this family together. For the first time since she passed away, I felt as though I'd finally honored both her wisdom and myself. That evening, at exactly 6:42 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Ryan. It was Emma. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. The moment I picked up, she didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize for Christmas. Instead, she said 5 words that confirmed I'd made the right decision. We need $15,000. The moment I answered, Emma didn't even bother with a greeting. David, we need $15,000. Not, how are you? Not, I'm sorry about Christmas. Just, we need $15,000. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd convinced myself that maybe Emma wasn't as selfish as she appeared. Maybe I'd judged her too harshly. But in that single sentence, she proved me wrong. I asked calmly, for what? She sighed dramatically. It's complicated. Our kitchen renovation went way over budget. And Ryan said you wouldn't mind helping. I looked around my quiet living room. The same living room where Linda and I had spent decades saving for every improvement we ever made. We never borrowed money for luxuries. We waited. We planned. We earned them. Yet here they were, renovating a perfectly good kitchen while asking me for more money only 2 days after using my credit card like their personal wallet. I spoke softly. I'm afraid I can't help. There was silence. Then she laughed. Oh, stop joking. I'm not joking. Emma's voice immediately changed. What do you mean you can't help? I mean exactly that. But you have plenty of money. There it was. Not. You've always will pet us. Not. We know it's a lot to ask. Just. You have plenty of money. As though my savings automatically belonged to them. I replied, my money isn't the issue. The issue is respect. Another long silence. Then Ryan came onto the phone. Dad. His tone suggested he was already annoyed. Emma says you're refusing to help. I am. Why? I couldn't believe he had asked. I almost laughed. Do you really not know why? Dad, if this is about Christmas. If. He sighed loudly. We already said we forgot. You forgot your father. You remembered everyone else. Ryan's voice hardened. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. Nothing. That single word erased 25 years of sacrifices. You know what, Dad? Ryan continued. Emma's parents appreciate everything we do for them. They're always supportive. They never make us feel guilty. I gripped the phone tighter. Supportive? I'd paid his university tuition. I'd helped him with the down payment on his house. I'd bought his first truck, covered medical bills when Lily was born, loaned him money for his business, paid off his credit card twice, supported him after he lost his first job. And somehow, I was the unsupportive one. I finally asked the question I'd avoided for years. Ryan, if your mother were alive, would you have treated her this way? The line went completely silent. He didn't answer, because he couldn't. Instead, Emma grabbed the phone again. David, honestly, you're acting emotional. It's just money. I almost smiled. No, Emma. It was never about money. It was about gratitude. About kindness. About remembering the man who never stopped showing up for you. I said quietly, you've mistaken generosity for obligation. And that's where this conversation ends. Then, for the first time in my son's life, I hung up on him. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. Ryan. Ignored. Then again. Ignored. Again. Ignored. By bedtime, there were 12 missed calls, 6 text messages, 3 voicemails. Not one contained the words, we're sorry. Instead, they read, call us back. Don't be childish. We need to sort this out. Emma is really upset. You're embarrassing us. Embarrassing them? I shook my head. They still didn't understand. The following afternoon, I decided to get out of the house. I stopped at my favorite neighborhood cafe, the same place Linda and I had visited every Saturday for nearly 20 years. As I waited for my coffee, someone tapped me gently on the shoulder. David. I turned around. It was Margaret, an old family friend. She smiled warmly before giving me a hug. I haven't seen you in ages. We sat together near the window. She asked about Ryan. I hesitated. Before I could answer, she said something unexpected. I ran into Emma's mother last week. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, Margaret. T nodded. She couldn't stop talking about the incredible Christmas gifts her son-in-law bought. I remained silent. Then she added. She said Ryan had finally learned that real family deserves expensive presents. The words hit me like ice water. Real family. So that's how they saw me. Not family. Just a bank account. That evening, I opened an old wooden chest in my attic. Inside were dozens of photo albums, birthday cards Ryan had made as a child, handwritten Father's Day letters, crayon drawings that read, "My dad is my hero." I smiled sadly. Children don't fake love. Adults sometimes forget it. As I turned another page, a folded envelope slipped onto the floor. It was addressed in Linda's handwriting. For David. Only if you ever feel alone. My hands began to tremble. I had never seen it before. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter that would completely change everything I believed about my son and reveal a secret Linda had taken to her grave. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope. Linda's handwriting hadn't faded with time. Neat, elegant, familiar. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. It began with only 4 words. My dearest David, if you're reading this, it means something has happened. Maybe I'm gone. Maybe you're sitting in our house feeling lonely. Or maybe you're wondering whether you've failed as a father. If that's the reason, please stop blaming yourself. A lump formed in my throat. It was as if she were sitting beside me. You love Ryan more than anyone in this world. Sometimes I think you love him so much that you forget to love yourself. I've watched you sacrifice promotions, vacations, hobbies, and even your health just to make sure our son never struggles. That's what makes you a wonderful father. But it's also what scares me. I slowly lowered the letter. Linda had noticed something years before I ever did. I continued reading. Children naturally appreciate sacrifices when they're young. But if parents solve every problem forever, eventually those sacrifices stop feeling special. They begin to feel normal, then expected, and finally demanded. I remembered every time Ryan had called asking for help. Dad, my rent is short. Dad, the car needs repairs. Dad, I need help with the mortgage. Dad, just this once. Every single time, I'd said yes. The next paragraph stopped me cold. Please promise me something. If the day ever comes when Ryan values your wallet more than your heart, choose yourself. Don't confuse love with obligation. Helping someone who is grateful is generosity. Helping someone who feels entitled is self-destruction. Tears blurred the ink. Linda hadn't written this because she doubted Ryan. She'd written it because she understood human nature better than either of us. Then I reached the final page. There was one sentence underlined TW. Ice. The greatest gift you can leave our son isn't money. It's the consequences of his choices. I read those words again and again. Consequences. Not revenge. Not punishment. Consequences. For the first time since Christmas, I didn't feel like a bitter father. I felt like a man finally accepting reality. I carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. Then I looked around the attic. Every box held memories. Ryan's soccer trophies, school report cards, a homemade Father's Day mug with crooked letters that read, "World's best dad." I smiled. That little boy had loved me. Somewhere along the way, life, comfort, and entitlement had changed him. Or perhaps, they had simply revealed who he had become. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Not from Ryan. From relatives. My sister, Carol. My cousin, Mike. Even my old neighbor, Susan. Every message asked the same question. Are you okay? We heard Christmas didn't go well. Apparently, news traveled fast. But not because Ryan had admitted the truth. Because Emma's mother had been proudly showing everyone the expensive gifts her wonderful son-in-law had bought. People assumed I'd helped pay. Only one person knew the truth. Me. Around noon, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I froze. Standing on my porch was my granddaughter, Lily, 9 years old, holding a small paper gift bag. Behind her stood Ryan's car. But Ryan stayed inside. Engine running. He never got out. Lily smiled nervously. "Grandpa, I made something for you." I knelt down. "What is it, sweetheart?" She handed me the bag. Inside was a handmade Christmas ornament. Construction paper. Glitter. A tiny family photo glued in the center. On the back, written in careful handwriting, "I love my grandpa." My heart shattered. "Did your mom help you make this?" She looked confused. "No. I made it at school. I wanted to give it to you on Christmas. But Mommy said there wasn't enough room in the car." There it was. The truth. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen not to bring my gift. A gift made by a little girl who loved her grandfather. Because expensive boxes for Emma's parents mattered more. I hugged Lily tightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is the best Christmas gift I received." She smiled, then whispered, "Grandpa, are you mad at Daddy?" Children always sensed more than adults believed. I gently kissed her forehead. No, I'm just disappointed. She nodded, as though she understood. Then she ran back to the car. Ryan still didn't get out. He simply drove away. Not even a wave. That evening, I hung Lily's handmade ornament in the center of my Christmas tree. Not the top, the center. Exactly where Linda always placed the most meaningful decorations. As I stepped back to admire it, the silence of the house was interrupted by another phone call. This time, the caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in years. Michael Turner, Ryan's former business partner. The man Ryan had blamed for destroying their company. I answered. Hello. Michael didn't waste time. David, I've carried this secret for 3 years. But after what I heard happened on Christmas, I think you deserve to know the truth. The next words out of his mouth would destroy the last bit of trust one still had in my son. For several seconds, I said nothing. Michael, it's been a long time. It has, he replied quietly. And I wish I weren't calling under these circumstances. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee. Something in his voice told me this wasn't just a casual conversation. It was a confession. I heard about Christmas, Michael said. My wife ran into your sister yesterday. I'm sorry, David. I sighed. It is what it is. No, he replied. It isn't. What happened to you started long before Christmas. 3 years earlier, Ryan had started a custom home renovation company with Michael. I had invested $250,000 to help them launch the business. Ryan told me they needed equipment, office space, employees. It sounded reasonable. I believed in my son. For the first year, everything seemed successful. Ryan drove a new SUV. They moved into a bigger house. Vacations became more expensive. I assumed business was booming. Then one afternoon, Ryan called me. Dad, the company is collapsing. He blamed everything on Michael. He mismanaged the money. He made terrible decisions. He ruined us. I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. Michael broke the silence. David, I never stole a penny. I frowned. What do you mean? The company didn't fail because of me. It failed because Ryan emptied the accounts. I felt my stomach tighten. That's impossible. I wish it were. Michael continued. I've kept copies of every financial statement, every transfer, every invoice. I never showed anyone because I didn't want Lily growing up with parents fighting in court. But after hearing what happened at Christmas, I can't stay silent anymore. He emailed me several documents while we were still on the phone. My laptop chimed. I opened the first file. Bank statements, company expenses, wire transfers. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed dozens of payments labeled luxury furniture, resort booking, designer boutique, private jewelry store. The amounts were staggering. None of them had anything to do with construction. Michael spoke again. Look at the dates. I did. One transfer after another. A luxury vacation in Hawaii, high-end furniture, a designer wardrobe, spa memberships, expensive electronics. Every payment came directly from the business account. Ryan said these were business development expenses. Michael laughed bitterly. Apparently, buying Emma a $12,000 necklace was considered business development. I couldn't speak. Then I found something else. A payment of $48,000. The recipient's name caught my attention. Harper Residence Renovations. I recognized the address immediately. Emma's parents' home. I stared at the screen. Michael quietly explained. They remodeled her parents' kitchen. They replaced their flooring. They built a new outdoor patio. Using company money, the room began spinning. The very people who'd opened luxury Christmas gifts had already benefited from tens of thousands of dollars that never belonged to them. My voice barely came out. Did Ryan know? Michael answered instantly. He approved every payment himself. I closed my eyes. Christmas suddenly made perfect sense. Ryan wasn't suddenly becoming generous. He had been spending other people's money for years. First the company's, then mine. There was one more thing, Michael said. I've never told anyone this. When the business started failing, I suggested selling my own truck to pay employees. Do you know what Ryan said? I swallowed hard. What? He looked me in the eye and said, my dad always bails me out. Those 6 words echoed through my mind. My dad always bails me out. Not, we'll figure this out. Not, I'll fix my mistakes. Just complete confidence that I would rescue him. Again, Michael sighed. I'm sorry, David. I should have told you years ago. I honestly believed he'd change. So did I. Before hanging up, he added, check your email. There's one last attachment. If I were you, I'd sit down first. The line disconnected. I opened the final document. It wasn't a bank statement. It was an email chain. The subject line read, emergency funding. The first message was from Ryan. Dad thinks the company is struggling because of Mike. If we keep that story straight, he'll probably lend us another $200,000. I stopped breathing. Below that, Emma had replied, good. He's always easier to convince when you act stressed. Another reply from Ryan. Exactly. He never says no. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. There it was. Not suspicion. Not rumors. Proof. They hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. They had planned it. They had discussed it. Together. I slowly closed my laptop. For the first time in my life, I wasn't mourning the loss of money. I was mourning the loss of the son I thought I had. The little boy in the baseball uniform. The teenager who called me his hero. The young man who promised to take care of me one day. He no longer existed. Or perhaps, he never had. As the evening grew darker, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Ryan. It was my sister, Carol. Her voice was shaky. David, I need you to come over. Why? She hesitated. Because Ryan and Emma are here. And they're telling the entire family that you've become senile. I stood up slowly. If they wanted a family meeting, they were finally going to get one. I arrived at my sister Carol's house 20 minutes later. The driveway was packed. Ryan's SUV, Emma's sedan, my nephew's truck, even my cousin Mike's old pickup. Every close member of our family was there. As I stepped onto the porch, I could already hear raised voices inside. Carol opened the door before I knocked. She looked exhausted. I'm sorry, David. I tried to stop this. What happened? She glanced nervously toward the living room. They're telling everyone you've become confused, that you're making reckless financial decisions. I smiled. So that's the story. She nodded sadly. I'm afraid so. The room fell silent the moment I walked in. Ryan stood near the fireplace with his arms folded. Emma sat beside her parents. Frank wouldn't even look me in the eye. Across the room sat cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends. Ryan forced a smile. Dad, I'm glad you came. I almost didn't. He laughed nervously. Can we all just calm down and talk? I took the empty chair opposite him. I'm listening. Ryan cleared his throat. Dad's been under a lot of stress lately. Emma nodded dramatically. He's making emotional decisions. Carol interrupted. What kind of decisions? Ryan sighed. He suddenly cut us off financially. Emma added. He even accused us of using him. Several relatives looked shocked. Then Emma's mother spoke. We're worried about him. He keeps saying strange things. I couldn't help smiling. Interesting. Not one person had mentioned Christmas. Not one person had mentioned the credit card. My cousin Mike finally looked at me. David, is any of this true? I calmly folded my hands. May I ask Ryan one question first? Everyone agreed. I turned toward my son. Ryan, did you use my credit card to buy Christmas gifts? His face immediately changed. That's not the point. It is the point. He shifted in his chair. You said I could use it. I asked if you bought those gifts. Yes. Were any of them for me? Silence. Emma jumped in. We already apologized. I looked directly at her. No. You said you forgot. Those are two different things. Nobody spoke. Then Aunt Susan quietly asked. Wait. You didn't buy David a Christmas present? Emma looked embarrassed. We were busy. Susan frowned. But you bought presents for everyone else. Emma's mother quickly interrupted. It was just a misunderstanding. No, I replied softly. It was a choice. Ryan suddenly became defensive. Why are we even talking about gifts? Because they weren't your gifts. The room froze. Ryan blinked. What does that mean? I slowly reached into my briefcase. I brought meeting. I placed several printed credit card statements on the coffee table. Every purchase highlighted. Luxury watch. Designer handbag. Diamond earrings. Travel accessories. Matching dates. Matching stores. Matching amounts. Carol picked them up first. Oh my goodness. One by one, the statements passed around the room. Nobody said a word. Frank stared at the papers in disbelief. Then slowly looked at Ryan. You bought my watch with your father's credit card? Ryan stammered. I was going to pay him back. When? No answer. His mother-in-law quietly removed the designer handbag from beside her chair. Her cheeks turned bright red. I didn't know. For the first time all evening. She actually looked ashamed. Ryan slammed his hand on the table. So what? I borrowed money. Parents help their children all the time. I nodded. You're right. They do. But grateful children don't humiliate their parents on Christmas morning. The room became silent again. Then Carol asked quietly, Ryan, did you really tell your father that forgetting him wasn't a big deal? He didn't answer, because everyone in that room already knew the answer. Just when it seemed the truth couldn't get any worse. Emma stood up. This is ridiculous. David is only doing this because he wants to control us. I slowly reached back into my briefcase. I was hoping you wouldn't say that. I removed another folder. Michael's financial records. The email chain. The business statements. I placed them beside the credit card bills. I wasn't planning to discuss this tonight. But since we're talking about control, perhaps everyone should read these. Ryan's face turned white. Absolutely white. No, he whispered. Don't. It was the first time all evening. He looked afraid. Carol picked up the first page. Her eyes widened. Then she looked at Ryan as though she'd never seen him before. What have you done? The room erupted into shocked whispers as the truth about the missing business money began to unfold. No one spoke. The only sound in the room was the crackling fireplace. Carol slowly read the first email aloud. Dad thinks the company is struggling because of Mike. If we keep that story straight, he'll probably lend us another $200,000. She stopped. The room became so quiet that you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then she picked up the second email. Good. He's always easier to convince when you act stressed. Carol lowered the paper and looked directly at Emma. You wrote this. Emma's face turned pale. I. She couldn't finish the sentence. Ryan suddenly stood up. Those emails don't prove anything. They're taken out of context. Michael's financial records lay beside them. Every transfer, every receipt, every unauthorized payment. My cousin Mike slowly flipped through the pages. Ryan, he looked heartbroken. You used company money to renovate your in-laws' house. Ryan remained silent. Frank slowly turned toward his daughter. You told us the renovation came from business profits. Emma couldn't look at her father. Frank stood up. His voice shook with anger. You lied to us? Emma whispered. Dad, please. No. He pointed toward the door. Don't call me Dad until you explain this. Her mother began crying. We had no idea. I believed her. For the first time since Christmas. I truly believed she hadn't known where the money had come from. She removed the designer handbag from her shoulder and placed it on the coffee table. I can't keep this. Frank quietly took off the luxury watch. He laid it beside the handbag. We don't want anything that was bought through deception. Ryan stared at them in disbelief. This is unbelievable. He shouted. Everyone's turning against us over a misunderstanding. I finally stood. No, Ryan. They're turning away from lies. He laughed bitterly. You've always loved playing the victim. Those words didn't hurt anymore. Because I no longer needed his approval. I looked around the room. I spent years believing that if I gave enough, I'd eventually receive love in return. I was wrong. Love that depends on money isn't love. It's a transaction. Several relatives quietly nodded. Then my granddaughter, Lily, walked into the living room. She had been upstairs playing with her cousins. She looked around at all the serious faces. Why is everyone yelling? No one answered. She walked over to me and slipped her small hand into mine. Grandpa, are you leaving again? My heart broke. I knelt beside her. No, sweetheart. I'm right here. She looked at Ryan. Daddy, why is Grandpa sad? Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his life. His daughter was asking a question he couldn't answer. I gently handed Lily the handmade ornament she'd given me. I hung this in the middle of my Christmas tree. Her face lit up. Really, it was my favorite gift. She smiled proudly. Then she looked at her parents. I told Mommy we had to take it on Christmas. The room froze. Emma slowly closed her eyes. Lily continued innocently. But Mommy said Grandpa already has enough decorations. No child can fake innocence. And no lie can survive it. Emma quietly covered her face. Tears rolled down her cheeks. For the first time, she looked genuinely ashamed. Ryan walked toward me. His voice was no longer angry. It was desperate. Dad, I made mistakes. I know. I can fix this. I shook my head. No. You can learn from it. That's different. He swallowed hard. Please, don't throw our relationship away. I looked him in the eyes. I didn't. You did. I reached into my briefcase one last time. Richard Collins had anticipated this moment. Inside was a sealed envelope. I handed it to Ryan. "What's this?" "Open it." His hands trembled. Inside was a copy of the updated estate plan. His eyes scanned the pages, then stopped. He read the same line 3 times. "Primary beneficiary, removed." His face drained of color. You changed your will." "Yes." "When?" "The morning after Christmas." He looked completely stunned. "You disinherited me?" I accepted reality. Ryan dropped into a chair. "This can't be happening." Emma began crying uncontrollably. Frank quietly walked over to me. "I'm sorry, David. I should have asked more questions." I shook his hand. "This wasn't your fault." He nodded. "But it became my responsibility the moment I accepted gifts I never questioned." That single sentence earned my respect. Unlike Ryan, Frank accepted responsibility. As I walked toward the front door, nobody tried to stop me. Except Lily. She ran after me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Will I still see you, Grandpa?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "As long as you want to." "Promise." "I promise." She hugged me one last time before letting go. I stepped outside into the cold evening air. Behind me, I could hear voices arguing inside the house. For once, none of them involved me. I got into my car feeling lighter than I had in years. But I had no idea that the biggest surprise was still waiting for me. The following morning, my attorney called with news that would change not only my future, but Ryan's as well. The next morning, I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was Richard Collins. "Good morning, David." "Morning. I've got some news." His tone was different, almost excited. "What happened? You remember the Harper Foundation?" Of course. Linda had volunteered there every Saturday for nearly 15 years. It provided scholarships for children who had lost one or both parents. Richard cleared his throat. "I spoke with their board this morning. They've accepted your proposal." I smiled. "So, the Linda Parker Memorial Foundation is officially being created. For the first time since Christmas." I genuinely smiled. Linda's name would live on, not through money sitting in bank accounts, but through children whose lives would be changed forever. That afternoon, I met Richard at the foundation's office. The board members welcomed me warmly. One elderly woman introduced herself. "My name is Helen. I worked with your wife for over 10 years. She reached into a drawer and handed me a photo. Linda sat on the floor surrounded by laughing children. I'd never seen that picture before. Helen smiled. She used to tell us, "Kindness is the only inheritance that grows after you give it away." I felt tears in my eyes. That was Linda, always thinking about others, always believing that love multiplied when it was shared, not when it was spent. While I was leaving the building, my phone vibrated repeatedly. Ryan. 5 missed calls. Then another. Then another. Finally, a text message appeared. "Dad, please answer. Everything is falling apart." I stared at the screen for several moments. Then I locked my phone without replying. Over the next week, the truth spread faster than Ryan expected. Michael finally cleared his own name. Former employees learned why the business had really failed. Friends who had blamed Michael for years called to apologize. Ryan's reputation collapsed. His biggest client canceled a renovation contract. A local bank refused to approve a new business loan after reviewing his financial history. Even people who had once defended him began keeping their distance. Not because I had exposed him, because the evidence spoke for itself. 3 days later, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, Ryan stood there alone. He looked exhausted. His expensive coat was gone. His beard had grown in. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a successful businessman. He looked like a frightened little boy. "Dad, can we talk?" I stepped aside. "Come in." Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Ryan looked around the living room. "I haven't been here in months." I nodded. "I noticed." He lowered his head. "I deserve that." Silence returned. Then he quietly placed something on the coffee table. It was my credit card, cut into 4 pieces. "I should have given this back a long time ago." Ryan looked at me. "I've spent the last few days reading Mom's journals." I frowned. "What journals?" "When we cleaned out the attic after she passed away. Emma packed a box. I found it after Christmas." He reached into his backpack and removed a worn notebook. "It's Mom's handwriting." He opened one page. I read something that destroyed me. His voice cracked. It says, "If Ryan ever forgets where he came from, I hope life teaches him what I no longer can." Tears rolled down his face. I forgot. I forgot everything. He wiped his eyes. I kept thinking success meant bigger houses, nicer cars, impressing other people. I wanted Emma's parents to admire me. I wanted everyone to think I'd made it. He laughed bitterly. And I lost the only person who loved me before I had anything. I remained silent. Not because I didn't care. Because apologies are easy. Change is hard. Ryan finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. Is there any way to fix this? I looked directly at him. You can't erase what happened. He nodded slowly. I know. But you can decide who you become next. He waited. I don't need my inheritance. I need my son. The room became silent. Ryan buried his face in his hand. For several minutes. He cried without saying a word. Before leaving, he stopped at the front door. I don't expect you to trust me again. I haven't earned that. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. I nodded. I hope you do. He left. Not with money. Not with promises. Only with the consequences of his choices. As I watched him drive away, I realized something. The greatest revenge had never been taking away his inheritance. It had been forcing him to face the man he had become. But life still had one final surprise waiting. 6 months later, there would be a knock on my door that would prove whether Ryan had truly changed, or whether this had all been another performance. 6 months passed. Spring had replaced the snow. The silence in my house no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Every Tuesday, I volunteered at the Linda Parker Memorial Foundation. Every Friday afternoon, I read books to children at the local library. For the first time since retiring, I wasn't simply existing. I was living. Then one Saturday morning, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Ryan stood there. But he wasn't alone. Beside him was Lily, smiling from ear to ear. Behind them sat an old pickup truck. The luxury SUV was gone. Ryan looked different. His expensive designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a plain blue work shirt. His hands were rough, covered in fresh paint. He looked tired, but honest. Hi, Dad. Hi. I hope we're not interrupting. I smiled at Lily. You never interrupt. She ran inside and hugged me. I missed you, Grandpa. I hugged her tightly. I missed you too. Ryan stayed on the porch. I brought something. He walked back to the truck and carefully carried a wooden box. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't polished. It was handmade. He placed it on my dining table. I built it myself. I slowly opened the lid. Inside were dozens of neatly organized envelopes. Each envelope contained a cashier's check. Richard Collins had already informed me what they were. Monthly repayments. Every dollar Ryan had ever borrowed from me. Even the money I'd told him years ago not to worry about. At the very bottom was a handwritten note. Dad, I know I can never repay what you gave me. Money isn't enough. But I never want you to wonder whether I finally learned my lesson. This isn't repayment. It's responsibility. Your son, Ryan. I quietly folded the note. I sold the SUV, Ryan said. We moved into a smaller house. I got a job with another construction company. No shortcuts. No lies. I start at the bottom every morning. He smiled faintly. And honestly, I sleep better than I have in years. I looked into his eyes. For the first time in a long time. There was no arrogance. No entitlement. Only humility. Over lunch, Eily proudly showed me pictures from school. Then she suddenly asked, Grandpa, can we plant flowers for Grandma today? I smiled. I think she'd love that. That afternoon, the three of us visited Linda's grave. Ryan quietly knelt beside the headstone. He placed a small bouquet of white lilies on the grass. Then, with tears in his eyes, he whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I became someone you would have been disappointed in. A gentle breeze moved through the cemetery. No one spoke. Some apologies don't need an audience. Before we left, Ryan turned toward me. I understand if the will never changes. I didn't come here because of money. I came because I finally realized. I almost lost my father. I nodded. And that's worth more than any inheritance. For the first time in months, I believed him. Not because of his words. Because of everything he'd done before speaking to them. Over the next year, Ryan kept every promise. He never asked for money again. He visited every Sunday. Sometimes we watched baseball. Sometimes we worked in the garden. Sometimes we simply sat on the porch drinking coffee. There were no grand speeches. Trust doesn't return overnight. It returns one honest day at a time. Lily became the brightest part of my week. Together we built birdhouses, baked cookies, and every Christmas, she insisted on hanging her handmade ornament in the very center of my tree. It goes here, she'd say, Because family belongs in the middle. Every year. I smiled. Because she understood something many adults never do. 2 years later, Richard Collins visited my house. David, I need to ask you something. I already knew what it was. Has anything changed? I looked out the window. Ryan was helping Lily build a swing in the backyard. She laughed every time he pretended to lose the hammer. For a long moment, I watched them. Then I smiled. Yes, but not everything. Richard opened his notebook. I made one change. Only one. Lily would inherit everything that had once been planned for Ryan. Not because Ryan deserved to be punished forever, but because I wanted my legacy to protect the next generation. Ryan would become the trustee until Lily reached adulthood. No ownership, only responsibility. When Richard asked why, I gave him the same answer Linda would have. Money should reward character, not create it. That Christmas, our family gathered once again. The tree was full. The fireplace was warm. Laughter echoed through the house. When it came time to exchange gifts, Ryan stood up. He walked over to me carrying a small wrapped package. I almost forgot once. I'll never make that mistake again. Inside the box was the old baseball glove we'd used when he was 12. It had been carefully restored. Inside was a small brass plate engraved with 7 simple words. Thank you for never giving up on me. I won't speak. I simply stood up and hugged my son, not because everything had been forgotten, but because everything had finally been understood. As the snow fell gently outside, I looked around the room, at my granddaughter laughing, at my son smiling, at the family photograph hanging above the fireplace, and I realized something Linda had known all along. Revenge isn't always about destroying someone's life. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is letting them face the consequences of their choices, giving them the chance to become better, and refusing to lose your own kindness in the process. The end.